Welcome back to Heal Your Roots podcast. For today's episode, we have Dr. Katie Manganello joining us again. And some exciting news is that Dr. Katie will be a reoccurring guest co host with Heal Your Roots podcast.
So there's postpartum OCD and there's perinatal OCD. So OCD that occurs immediately after the child is born is called the postpartum OCD. And then OCD that occurs during pregnancy is called perinatal OCD.
There's a lot of uncertainty. I think there's a lot of uncertainty, and it's hard to know which is the right thing to do. And a lot of time there is no right thing. Like I know we talked about on a different episode, like there is no right thing. There's just the best thing under the circumstances for you. Katie, I'm so excited to have you back on and have you on for future episodes.
I am so excited. I'm really looking forward to it as well. I think we'll have a lot of good topics to cover.
So today's episode is going to be a little bit different from our usual structure. Usually we have a therapist or mental health practitioner on. We kind of interview them, get to know them, their background and everything. But today, since we are the co-hosts, to kind of set the field, it'll just be us kind of having a conversation. And we're really going to dive into postpartum OCD, anxiety, and what it's like to be a new mom as an entrepreneur. So Katie will actually be interviewing me. The interviewer has turned into the interviewee. So this is going to be a little bit different for us. So I'm really excited to be asked some questions and share some of my experiences with you, Katie, and the rest of the listeners.
Yes, me too. I cannot wait. As somebody who is not a mother, or at least, not yet in life, I'm really excited to pick your brain a little bit about how it's going for you, especially as a new mom. So I can't wait to get into it. But yes, if we would like to start out talking about some OCD in the postpartum and perinatal realm, I'd be happy to talk about that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Katie, I know in the other episodes, so you've been on two other episodes so far with us. And every time I ask you to share what is OCD for the listeners. So if they haven't listened before, if you can kind of share what that is, and then in particular, postpartum OCD as well.
Yes. Yes. So briefly, just typical OCD. It's a disorder that is a doubting disorder, and it is comprised of two parts, which is the obsessions and the compulsions. Obsessions are the core fears or the intrusive thoughts, images of whatever it is that's feeling very distressing. Common themes would be contamination, harm OCD. Um, I think the contamination is like one of the most popular, but there's also religious OCD or scrupulosity. So there's lots of different types, which I've kind of touched on in previous episodes. So that's kind of the theme with the obsessions. So obsessions, fears. The compulsions are things that people are doing to try to alleviate that distress that comes along with the intrusions. But it the more people engage in compulsions, the more distressing the disorder becomes. The compulsions provide a short term relief, but long term distress. So, common compulsions would be maybe flipping light switches or washing hands, those types of things that people have more commonly heard about. So, if anybody wants to learn more about that or other subtypes, they can listen to some of the other episodes. But as it relates to this topic, so there's postpartum OCD and there's perinatal OCD. So, OCD that occurs immediately after the child is born is called the postpartum OCD. And then OCD that occurs during pregnancy is called perinatal OCD. They're pretty similar. They're because they're all surrounding the baby. So another big thing to know about OCD is that it's always targeting your values and going towards the things that you really care about. So it makes sense that new parents um, can experience these things because they're so excited and happy to have a baby, right? And so there's also a lot of pressure to be like, I got to keep this little baby alive, right? So there's a lot of fears, I think, that come up, and it's normal to an extent for people to experience some of those fears or stressors that come with just having a baby. But the postpartum or perinatal OCD is what kind of takes it to that next level. A lot of the obsessions would be about the baby getting hurt or contaminated or lost. Also, unwanted sexual obsessions at times. A lot of the compulsions related to this might involve checking baby monitors excessively, mental rituals, seeking reassurance about being a good parent. Um, Other things too, it could be avoiding of the baby if they're afraid of harming the
Mhm.
baby. One thing that they might do could be avoidance, which can be really problematic, right? Because that can turn into neglect if there's not other people there to, caretake and help out. And the goal for the new parent is to never actually neglect their baby, right? Like I want to make that clear that it's more so that they are afraid that they would potentially harm the baby. So, these things can show up in different ways. But more importantly, the people who are experiencing these fears, the fears almost never, you know, come true in terms of feeling that they are actually going to harm their baby and then them actually intentionally harming the baby. Um, Obviously, accidental harm happens at any rate with being a parent, right? To some extent, but in terms of fearing that they're going to intentionally harm their baby, it's highly unlikely that that's actually going to happen. The more you engage in the treatment for it. Um, does that accurately, would you say that makes sense as a summary of what that might look like?
Yeah. So I wanted to ask actually, because a lot of the things you mentioned, I think are very common that just
Yeah,
come up as having a like being a new parent, having
yeah,
a completely new responsibility in life of making sure that this other human being that's basically helpless relies on you to stay alive. So there's so much responsibility and pressure that what is kind of the differentiator between like what is kind of normal stress and anxiety and concern versus crossing that threshold of like, okay, this is becoming obsessive or this is a compulsion or this is not healthy and I need to seek help for this.
right. Yes, you're right. And this is where it can be a little bit difficult because these are normal reactions in a lot of ways. But there is kind of that fine line of where it's no longer normal. Like if you are consistently distressed. So, I mean, somebody is probably checking the baby monitor, I don't know,
A
so many
lot.
times before they fall asleep. Yeah, right. Or if there are concerns of, the baby seemed more they caught a cold, so I'm going to be checking it a little more frequently than I typically would. Or they've been having trouble sleeping, and so we're keeping an extra eye on them, right? But it's another thing if things seem to be going well with the baby. We put the baby down and we are constantly checking their breathing and analyzing, seeing their chest going up and down for hours, right? Or for
Right.
a very extended period of time. Um, I when I'm usually explaining OCD, I usually would explain it as it's interfering with your functioning, but there is a level of being a new parent that whether it's OCD or not, it's not quite you're going to have your functioning interfered with regardless as a new parent, right?
Yeah.
So I think a lot of it is also how distressing it is for somebody. Like I remember the first person that I had assessed that had met for OCD with their baby was they were it went beyond just like a lack of sleep because you have to get up to feed the baby. It was that like,
Hmm.
okay, now that the baby's asleep, I don't get to go to sleep now because now I need to watch the baby and make sure that nothing happens to them while they're sleeping and like watching them in their crib and again like checking to see that they're breathing or uh, this one person I know, I recall they were doing like excessive like prayers around the baby. Like they'd have to pray so many times a certain prayer in order for the baby to stay safe. Um, Things like that. They can also seem like maybe those are more common types of things that people would be doing with a new baby, right? Like checking the monitor. Other
Yeah.
things that maybe wouldn't be as common that people with OCD postpartum OCD might be struggling with is around that harm of the baby. So, maybe excessively washing hands before picking the baby up so that the baby doesn't get sick. Or
Hmm.
going back to that avoidance piece, maybe they're avoiding changing diapers because they're having unwanted intrusive thoughts of what if I molest the baby while I'm changing their diaper, or purposely saying, "Oh, I'm gonna let my partner carry the baby down the steps because I don't want to because I'm afraid I'll drop the baby, or maybe I'll lose control and throw the baby down the steps, right? Like, so if you are purposely avoiding those things, now it can be normal for a thought like that to pop in your head, right? Maybe I'll trip and fall and drop my baby, which sounds very scary. But you then kind of take a second back and you're like, all right, strange thought. We carry the baby down the steps. Versus it's a rule in the house that I'm not going to carry the baby down the steps. My partner does that. That's their responsibility. So those are some examples where things might look a little bit different versus with it being OCD versus other parenting challenges that happen with any new parent.
Yeah, I'm glad you were able to explain that because as you said, each one, for a lot of them, I was like, oh, I was
I
checking
do
the baby
that.
breathing nonstop. Oh, I have these intrusive visuals of like, oh my God, what if I drop her? If what I trip, I'm super clumsy, right? So I'm like, oh my God, I'm scared that I'm going to drop her. So I'm like constantly watching where my feet are going to make sure, right? Like I don't want her to get sick, but it sounds like it's the excessive piece, right? Like we all have a little bit of that, and then we're able to transition out or do something different versus
Mhm.
it sounds like the person gets stuck in this and it lasts for hours and days and however long.
Right, right. And exactly. And depending on how far they get stuck, like it can show up in different ways too. Because I mean, again, it's kind of like showing up on a spectrum, right? Like on a typical, in a typical couple, maybe who just has a baby, like I'm sure that there is like a level of, you may bicker more than typical, or there's like, general parenting struggles
Mhm.
with your partner and how that interferes in your relationship, right? But it could go to a whole nother level if the OC is taking over, where they're like, I have to be with the baby 24/7 and I cannot, give my partner any attention because I'm so focused on the baby kind of
Mm.
thing, right? There's obviously going to be a bit of that happening along that spectrum, right? But it's when it becomes more extreme and interfering with the relationship or in your life in other ways, opposed to this is a typical new parenting type of situation that's tough. Um, I think that Kira and I have another episode coming up here in, I guess it would be the week after this. I'll let them edit whenever that's going to come out. But we have an upcoming episode with a few of my colleagues, Dr. Brown and Dr. Bliss. They specialize in women's health. And so they will be able to come on and talk more in depth about women's health, how, postpartum anxiety and depression can show up differently than um, the typical kind of adjustment period, and all those types of things. They also know a lot about infertility and things of that nature and adjusting to challenges as it relates to those issues. So we will be able to have a much more in depth conversation with them about some of this stuff.
Yeah, so stay tuned for that. I think that I mean, this is great to differentiate because I feel like a lot of the information, like while I was pregnant, afterwards, was not common knowledge and not very clear and things that are normalized or it's a stigma or you think I should be doing this, I should be feeling this way. And it's very confusing and conflicting information online.
Hmm.
Because doctors don't always share a lot of this information, or if you don't take like a baby class alone or with your partner, you may not know. So I think this is going to be really beneficial for people, A, just to kind of normalize this experience, but to be able to tell the difference between what is a common or normal, I hate using the word normal, but like generally what's
Right.
expected versus an unhealthy amount that is, getting into a different territory that this could be obsessive compulsive disorder.
Yes, for sure. As you were saying that, I was thinking too, another pretty big marker of differentiating is the level of guilt and shame that is
Mm,
experienced.
yeah.
I'm sure we always hear of like mom guilt, right? Like there's some of that that's going to show up again generally, but like it can become much more intense, that really intense feeling of shame and guilt that comes along with it being OCD.
Yeah. And I think it's tough to know because if a lot of people are not in the field, right? They're not mental health professionals or medical professionals. So they may not know what that threshold is. And it could be a very
Right.
subjective experience of, well, yeah, everyone has mom guilt or everyone experiences these things. So this is probably normal, or I should be anxious, I should be worried. Isn't that a sign of me caring and it being like a healthy amount of worry, right? Like growing
Mhm.
up, my mom would say, you know, someone loves you about how much they worry about you. Not healthy, but like
Right.
there's these messages that we receive. It's you don't really know what that threshold is. I'm curious to know also, is this something that shows up if someone never had OCD or wasn't diagnosed with it before, that it can kind of start new as an onset after becoming a new parent? Or is this more common
Yeah.
if someone has already had OCD and now the topic or the, focus has shifted?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. So, with the perinatal or the postpartum OCD, it seems from what research shows, it seems to affect about 1 to 2% of pregnant or postpartum women. Um, but it also shows up obviously for people who have already had OCD and then symptoms can worsen. Also,
Hmm.
OCD likes to like kind of like hop themes. So if somebody was maybe experiencing contamination, OCD in the past and they've gone through treatment and they're better, but now they have a baby. Now it might be like harm or contamination towards the baby type of thing.
Hmm.
So yes, the answer is both. It can bring a flare up or a new episode or exacerbate things with somebody who has already had it. And it can also tend to just, be increased for pregnant or postpartum women. Also, another thing that people don't talk about at all, I feel like, or not much, is how this can happen for fathers too. I know some fathers who experience anxiety around not just anxiety, like OCD around just that increased responsibility of their child and wanting to keep them safe and same types of behaviors showing up really.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, when I was taking that, like a baby class, which I highly recommend for anyone who is pregnant or planning to be pregnant, take a baby class before you have the baby. Very valuable. But I learned in there, postpartum for the partner who may or may not be the father or another, depending on the relationship structure, is that the partner can also have postpartum depression, anxiety, OCD, who's not the birthing parent, and how it's really important to also be aware and look out for cues for that as well. Because I think we don't necessarily, it's not maybe as common to think about the partner because the birthing parent is going through all of these changes at once, that we forget that the supporting partner also needs support and is also having a huge life transition for them too.
That it really is something that is not something that is talked much about unless you, like you said, you go to a specific baby class or I mean, that's not even anything that was really showing up in my training until I was seeing people and it was showing up and I was, of
Yeah.
course we would treat it the same way, but yeah, it is a nuance. And I think it's sad for those other partners because it might feel less valid for them to
Mhm.
experience those things, but it's really not any less valid. It's still a huge transition and a big shift in responsibilities. So
Absolutely. I think this,
yeah,
I should also want to make a note that this also goes for adoptive parents too who have a
yeah,
baby, right? Like it's not, yes, there's all these changes for the mother after the hormonal imbalance and all of these things and the partner, but also if you're adopting a child, like being a new parent is hard, period. Regardless of what part of that process you are were a part of.
yeah, definitely. Which this seems like a good time for us to segue into some of our questions for you. What do you think?
Sure. Yeah. I noticed myself being like, oh, I keep asking questions. I keep trying to be the interviewer. But yeah, go for it.
Yes, let's talk and let's, switch the roles a little bit. So I'm so excited to hear about what it's like having a new baby. I'm kind of at the age or the realm in my life where my friends are just starting to have babies or get pregnant. So I actually don't have really many people in my life that I'm really close to that do have babies yet. So
Hmm.
but some are coming up. So I am like ready to get all the details and kind of know what this is like because everybody says how hard it is and how you don't sleep
Hmm.
and how there's a lot of body changes, but I feel like there's so much more to it that people just don't talk about. So I can't wait to dig in. I think one of the first things I want to ask you about is just in the realm of being a professional. So on one aspect, you're a business owner, right? And then on the other, you are a therapist. So I'm really curious for you what some of the challenges have been. Let's start out with maybe like the business realm, because there's a lot of places, if you work at a hospital, for example, if you work at a hospital, you already have, benefits through your job and how you have an allotted postpartum time that you can take off, right? So without having a job where it's like that, where you kind of make the rules, right? How did you work through the whole maternity leave and managing the business?
Yeah. So part of this was actually a lot of planning before I even got pregnant or was thinking about starting to try to get pregnant. Being in private practice, especially being a private practice owner, I think has a lot of benefits and privileges in that I can create my schedule. I
Hmm.
can, I'm in control of my job, who I see, when I see them, the structure, who I work with, everything like that. So I already had in my mind, like, okay, I'm in private practice. I don't have a built in maternity leave, right? Like if I don't see clients, I don't get paid, right? Like that's kind of how it goes for a lot of therapists who might be in private
Yeah.
practice, right? There's pros and cons to this. A lot of freedom, less burnout, but then also not as much of the financial stability sometimes, depending on your caseload, right? And if you're not seeing clients, you're not getting paid, like I said. So I really had this in mind to plan for, okay, I want to own a private practice, a group practice. Because if I'm not going to be working, there has to be some other kind of income coming in. So having other therapists in place and really, I mean, this was built out very long prior to this, right? Is thinking about having other income. So having other therapists work under me, having other, whether it's a course that we're working on right now, publishing a book, having other streams of income and thinking about that ahead of time and creating that really made a huge difference. Just knowing that I always knew I wanted to be a mother. And I'm in private practice, I'm a therapist. So, and I don't want to work in an agency. So, how am I going to align all of these things? So, a lot of planning took place. Also, then being in the practice, having the group practice already, and being someone who did a lot of the administrative work and wears a million hats in the business, I knew that, okay, once I have my baby, I'm not going to be able to answer phone calls for consultations. I'm not going to be able to do all of these things. Like, I don't know what my schedule, I know that I'm not going to have a predictable schedule. And you can't run a business like that, right?
Right.
So we made sure that we brought in employees that would take those roles. And that happened way in advance. And that was really hard to release that control of being like, this is my baby. Like I've been running this, like I know how everything is supposed to go, how I want it to go, right? And being able to hand that off to somebody was really tough. But we found such an incredible person, Serena, who's our intake coordinator, that it has made the transition so much smoother and easier and like a huge relief and weight off my shoulders that I thought like, why didn't I do that sooner? Like, what was I holding on to? But that has been huge and instrumental is like creating a team, right? Like they say, like it takes a village. It's not like it's a cliche, but it's really true. It takes a village to run a practice. It takes a village to raise a child. To do anything really big, you need a team of people that you can trust in place that do good work. Um, so that was part of that process. I don't know if that was a long-winded answer.
No, that was a great answer. And those are all things that I have not or wouldn't necessarily just think of off the top of my head. Like you talking about that whole aspect of having to really drop some control and like hand over responsibilities of your baby, right? And I'm
Mhm.
sure you're gonna have to do that with your actual baby now too, right? Like and
Yeah.
you know what? That's something I think a lot of people struggle with is actually so there this is a little plug for Bravo. I don't know if any of our listeners also watch Bravo, but there's this show Vanderpump Rules where one of the people on there, her name's Sheena, she actually has OCD and she just had a baby a couple years ago. And one of her things that shows up is that she really struggles with allowing other people to watch her baby. And so it was really interfering with her relationship and with her ability to work and go do things without letting the baby be with either her mom or her sister or somebody who is a close family member. And that was a huge strain. So if anybody watches that, that is something where it's a really good example of what this can look like, right? So I'm sure that that's going to be a challenge, not just with work, but also with your little baby.
Yeah. I mean, I'm fortunate enough to have my mom who lives close by to watch her pretty regularly for, my mother-in-law to watch her, and whether there's like friends in town and things like that. I have a lot of people in my life that I trust. I don't typically have people in my life that I don't trust. So I think that kind of eliminates some of that, knowing that these are all people that I can rely on, that I trust that will be able to take care of her, that would never do anything intentionally to harm her, right? So that takes a lot of stress off of me and pressure. And having that peace of mind, I'm like, take her. Like, if you want to hang out with her, hang out with her. I'm going to go take a nap or I'm going to go do something else because that's that peace of mind. I don't know what it's going to be like if when we're going to need to have someone who is not an immediate family member or a close friend.
Right.
That's gonna be tough because I don't know you and I don't know what your intentions are, and, there's a whole slew of things that's gonna take a lot of time to trust somebody, to watch this little human that's yours. So, yeah, I mean, I don't have OCD, but I can imagine that being exacerbated because that is really scary to think about.
It is. Yeah, definitely. So you explained a lot of how you had to do so much planning for a very long time to make these changes within the business, within your practice, right? Um, but how do you feel like it's impacted you specifically around being a therapist? So like your main role, right?
Yeah, so that was interesting because we are fully telehealth. A lot of my clients didn't know until I told them, until I chose to tell them, right? Because if we're in person, it's going to be hard to hide that.
Right.
So I had a little bit more control in when and how I was going to tell my clients. I waited until I think it was like maybe 4 months before I was due. And I think that was a good time because it was allowing them to know, okay, like in 4 months, which is a solid amount of time to, I think, mentally prepare that, my therapist is going to go on leave. If I need to make any adjustments, like the things that we're working on, we can kind of adjust or continue. I felt like that was a good amount of time to kind of therapeutically work through that with the client and give them space to process if they needed to. Luckily, all my clients were like so happy for me and excited and just, wishing me all these wonderful things. And then we went right back into what was going on with them. So it wasn't a huge disruption. I also didn't have a huge caseload at that point because I have the group practice. So a lot of the other therapists have a bigger caseload than me. I was really just seeing clients that I've seen for a really long time, just maintaining. I wasn't taking any new clients on after a certain point because I wanted to be mindful and respectful that, if you're going to be opening up to me and we're going to be doing deep work and I'm going to leave in a couple months, that's not really fair. Um,
Right.
so I made sure to anyone who was reaching out to let them know, I'm not accepting new clients. And if they push, like, listen, like, I'm going to be on maternity leave soon. So I really like it's going to be a disservice to you. So I'm not going to be able to see you. Um, so that part wasn't too bad. I think a really hard part of the process of being pregnant and a therapist is the first few months of just being so nauseous. Like, that was rough because they call it morning sickness, but it is not morning sickness. It is all day sickness. Like, I don't know why they came up with it in the morning because it's not just in the morning. I don't know about other people's experiences. Mine was not didn't matter what time of the day it was. It could happen at any point. Um, and working in private practice was huge because I thought to myself, like, I really don't know how I would have been able to handle this if I worked in an agency or a hospital or a setting where I can't A, work from home and B, just call out. Like, it was
Hmm.
I'm very grateful and fortunate that I was able to work from home and set my life up in that way because, man, that was really tough. So, like, my heart goes out to a lot of women who don't have that and either had to push through or call out or maybe lose their jobs or just, figure out a way to move through that because it is debilitating to just be nauseous all day long or throwing up or being in bed. Like, your mind is elsewhere. And as therapists, like we need to be present. We need to be emotionally and mentally present for our clients. And because I was able to like shift my schedule around, I was able to kind of mitigate some of that and let my clients know, like, hey, like I'm not feeling too well, like, touching base with them to keep them informed of what was going on.
Wow, I definitely would not think about that aspect of being nauseous and, like, working with that
Right.
either, because I've definitely heard of people saying that, yes, it's not just in the morning, right? But the ability to actually have to be sick if you are sick, right? You
Mhm.
can't just be I mean, you could, I mean, things can happen, but it's tough if you're mid-session talking to somebody and you're like, "Be right back."
Yeah,
You
I
know?
mean,
I mean, accidents are gonna happen sometimes, I guess, but yeah, I mean, if you can plan for that and you have the ability to kind of move things around, I'm sure that makes that a lot more manageable.
yeah, I mean, imagine being hungover the whole right, like, think about the worst hangover you've ever had,
For,
and
like, 3
now
months.
you have to do therapy.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So it's like that, and then just eating like sleeves of crackers, just saltines, because So we won't go into the details, TMI. But yeah, the beginning stage is really tough, especially being a therapist because you need this emotional capacity that gets really dwindled away because you just don't feel well for a really prolonged period of time.
Yes. No, I'm glad you brought that up because one of my other questions I was thinking a lot about is how your body changes just throughout the whole process. So you just already started by saying a little bit about what was challenging earlier on in the pregnancy, but can you say anything else about just how your body changed and if there were any positive aspects or negative aspects or just kind of neutral things that just changed that maybe you weren't expecting?
Yeah, I mean, so many things with body image. It's really crazy. I'm really, really trying to be mindful and intentional of how I speak about myself physically and how I feel about myself because I have a daughter and I really don't want to pass down these like negative body image issues and beliefs and narratives. It's really hard, right? Like, I've done a lot of work myself, but still like it's so ingrained the way that we look and how that kind of ties to our worth and how we feel about ourselves and how we feel like others perceive us. And there was a point like in the beginning of the pregnancy where I didn't look pregnant just yet, but I definitely gained weight. And it could have been like, oh, she just had like a lot of burritos these past few weeks. Like, what's going on? Like no one is going to ask you if you're pregnant, but I felt like people knew I was gaining weight. And like there was this really weird, like internally, like feeling self conscious and wanting to be like, I'm pregnant. Like that's why I look this way, but like not doing that because that's strange and weird. And then once I finally had like my belly pop, I kind of felt relieved and I was like embracing it. I'm like, oh, everybody knows now. Like it's okay. People
Mhm.
can talk to me about it. Like, yeah, of course I'm going to look big. I have a baby growing inside of me. Like it's fine. Like a lot of some of those insecurities kind of went away because I had this reason or
Like,
this
I'm
excuse.
allowed to be bigger now because I have a reason, I have a baby, not just because my weight is fluctuating kind of thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was really big. And then just finding things that fit. Like there are not a lot of stores or places that sell flattering or cute maternity clothes. I mean, yes, if you want to just throw a bag on you and call it a day, you can. But, you still want to look cute. So I had a really hard time finding things that would like fit me and make me feel good and make me feel still attractive. Right. So even just going through the process of like shopping and then trying on clothes, which is like physically exhausting. I was like, I don't even feel like taking my pants on and off.
Yeah, I bet.
Is tiring, but yeah, like so many things changed. My feet were inflamed, my hands were swollen. It really is like this roller coaster where like the beginning with like my experience personally, everyone is different, right? Some people love pregnancy and they enjoy it and there's not any of these hiccups or they don't like experience negative aspects of it and like kudos to them. Like that's phenomenal. Like one of the lucky ones, right? Like love that for you. Was not my experience.
Can't relate.
Yeah, it's like the beginning is like you're nauseous, you feel horrible. Second trimester is pretty good. You're getting your energy back. your belly showing, so it's exciting, right? Like you're able to like eat again and do all of these things. And then third trimester creeps around and it's like, okay, like now I'm getting heavy. Now my back hurts. Now I have restless leg syndrome that I never had or knew what the hell that was. And very unsettling experience. It's hard to sleep. You have to like roll from one side to the other to get up every single time. Like I really took advantage of the fact of just being able to like move in a very natural way because every movement you have to be very intentional of like how you're getting up and where you're moving and like is it worth it to go over there for all the effort that I have to put into doing this?
Yeah, little things you would not even think about at all.
Yeah. And I think a big piece of the physical part is needing so much help. I needed so much help physically to get things. Like I couldn't bend over at a certain point. Like you really have to rely on a lot of people around you, which, depends on your personality, can be either, some people welcome that. Other people, it's really hard if you have a hard time asking for help or receiving help. It's going to be tough. Like there was, especially after the pregnancy, like I needed a lot of help physically. And like that really weighed on me emotionally and just like, wow, I can't do a lot of these simple tasks. Like I felt like a burden. I felt, I don't, useless, right? Like I really did. Like I can't do anything. I have to take care of a baby. I'm healing, but someone else has to take care of me. Like, oh my God, like this is a horrible, it felt like a horrible experience. Like I need someone constantly to help me. And I felt very helpless and hopeless for a little bit in the beginning. I think like as I spoke to a lot of new moms, they're like, oh yeah, like there's a lot of crying in the shower in the first 2 months. I'm like, wow, I did too. Like nobody talks about that prior. It's, there's a lot of sadness that kind of comes through, like this grieving and transition. It's a lot to carry in the beginning.
Right. And I think another big part of the beginning that I foresee being incredibly difficult for me as a person is the keeping it a secret. Like you can't really, or
Mm.
you're not supposed to like, or it's not advice. I don't know. Like you just, everybody says what you don't tell people for what the first how
12
long?
weeks.
Yeah, okay, so that's a long time to keep a really, really, really big life change happening. And that also I can understand, I guess, the rationale for why that is the way it is, but also it's like it has to feel isolating to an extent.
Yeah, and a lot of the time people say that is because the likelihood of miscarriage is so high in the beginning. Um, which, it's kind of sometimes it feels counterintuitive, right? Like if I have this big thing going on with my body and now like if I planned this and I'm excited about this pregnancy, right? And I want to share this with everybody and then, I have a if this person has a miscarriage and nobody knows you were pregnant to begin with and now you're grieving, it's you have to tell people so they're like, "Oh my god," and now you have to tell them the next thing that happened. So it's like this emotional roller coaster where I feel like actually might be more helpful if the closest people to you knew so that
Right.
God forbid if that happens to you, which is very common, that you have that support that you need. Right? Like it's
Right.
it's it's almost like a superstitious thing that we've kind of accepted as the norm is that, don't share this because if it doesn't work out, not everybody knows about it. Like that's kind of weird.
Right. Exactly. It's very much that whole thing in society of don't share your discomfort or don't share that you're having don't make other people uncomfortable with your discomfort. Meanwhile, this is a huge, I mean, if having a miscarriage, I cannot even imagine. Like and it's common too, right? So it does feel like there should be more support around that.
Yeah. I mean, I think
Scary.
they say within the first it's the first 12 weeks, right, is when it's the most likely. I think it's like 25% chance for any pregnancy. I don't know if that's
Mhm.
exactly, but it's pretty high up there. Like I mean, almost every person in my life who has been pregnant or, something along the lines, like there's a lot of women in my life that I know that have had experienced a miscarriage.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I know
it's
a lot as
not
well.
it's not that like it's not talked about because that's common, right? And I think that if people recognize like it doesn't mean there's something wrong with you or that you did something to cause this, like it's just like biologically, like, this is what happens, like, these are the statistics of what can happen, like, we're literally growing a human inside of us. It's not always going to work out, unfortunately. So, like, having that support ahead of time, I think is actually really important. Like, we told we told a couple people, like, the day we got the pregnancy test and it said pregnant, like, I can't keep that secret. I can
Yeah,
keep
I totally feel like that's how I'd be.
I can keep other people's secrets, but my own secrets, I'm like, I wanna tell
Yes,
everybody.
same.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally hear you on that. Well, so those were a lot of the changes that were kind of happening for you, like, while you were pregnant. But what's it been like since you've had your baby? Do you want to talk a little about her?
Sure. So, do you mean in terms of, like, physically or just, like, all of it?
So I am curious physically for sure, but I do also want you to be able to just kind of talk about the fun stuff with her and like being able to see her and like learn about her personality as she's growing and all of that.
Yeah. So it's a real roller coaster. Like, when people say, "Oh, it's really hard," I feel like people who are not parents, and we did this too. You have, like, this hubris, like, "Oh, it can't be that hard," or, like, everybody's doing it. Like, we'll know. We'll be able to figure it out better. You get humbled real quick. It is as hard as people say and even harder. And it's not like the hard thing is that you are so sleep deprived and you're so sleep deprived, like, you can't function, right? Like, you don't have time or energy to do anything besides make sure that this baby is alive, fed, changed, and safe, right? Like, you don't really have to, you're not sleeping much. You don't have time to eat. You don't have time to clean the house, like, or clean yourself. Like, there's all of these things that kind of go out the window, especially in the very beginning. So everything is focused on this baby. And all of these new responsibilities that don't go away are there. So if you're someone who is already anxious, this is gonna take it up a notch. Like, I'm normally kind of an anxious person. I've worked on it a lot throughout my life at coping mechanisms, but guess what? All those coping mechanisms go out the window because I don't have time to do them. So it was really tough in the beginning. I'd say the first 2 months, but mostly, like, the first couple weeks were brutal. It was really just trying to survive, and I have to say that, like, I'm very, very fortunate and blessed that I have a partner who is in it with me 24/7 throughout all of it, and he works from home with me, right? Like, that's because we intentionally made our life that way, but having someone to, like, tag team of, okay, like, I'm gonna lose my shit. Can you come in and take your turn? And then vice versa. And, like, doing all the things together and knowing I can trust him and he's there to support me, like, emotionally, mentally, physically, like, all of it, especially during those, like, fluctuating hormones in the beginning where, like, you just are grieving your old self, like, you're a completely new person now, this new role. Your body doesn't feel like yours anymore. You're healing from childbirth, whether it's vaginal or like cesarean, right? Like, all of these changes. And having a partner who has your back and is, like, reassuring you and supporting you is so huge and important. I have to give a shout out to Iran. Like, thank you for
Yeah, you're
helping me so much. And I found a mommy group in my neighborhood that has been
Oh, that's awesome.
huge. Yeah, like, being able to go every Friday to this group to, like, sit with other women who are moms and talk about this stuff and support each other. A lot of them are business owners too. Like, having that community, I think, has been instrumental in, like, keeping me sane for my mental health for sure. And I think now that she's, like, there's a little bit of a pattern now. Like, okay, she's sleeping. We know when she's going to sleep, for how long, kind of, when she needs to eat. Like, we're picking up on her now. And when she smiled for the first time, like, in response to us, my heart melted. Like, that's when I was like, oh, this is all worth it now. That was a game changer for sure, was seeing her smile in response
Oh
to
my
us.
gosh, that is so cute.
Yeah, she's a doll, and, like, you can see her little personality now, like, when she laughs at certain things or, like, her reflexes are just crazy. Like, I'm a really highly sensitive person, like, sensory-wise, and I think that she's kinda like that too. Like, she reacts really well to things, and it's just, like, fun to watch her grow. Each week is, like, something different. Seriously, like, she's gaining weight or her hair color is changing, her eyes are changing, she's responding to things. it's really beautiful to watch that part and think about, like, who is she gonna grow into? Like, this little human that, my partner and I are molding to be a good person, like, what is she gonna be like in a couple years is really cool to think about.
Yeah, that really is so cool to think about. And you know what else is just so interesting about this is I bet we could have this same conversation, like, every week or every month, and all of your answers could be different, right?
Yeah.
Like, your answer, if I asked you right now, because 'cause I'm finding myself wanting to be like, "What's the most challenging thing? What's the most rewarding thing?" But I think that's so subjective to the phase that you're just in right now, which just, like, talk about mindfulness being important. I feel like as a parent, that's something you have to, like, soak in.
Yeah. I mean, being in these mommy groups and like the moms are like different stages with their kids, right? Like I have the youngest. I showed up like 2.5 weeks postpartum. People are like, "How are you even here?" I'm like, "I don't know. I'm a zombie. I don't know, but I
You're like,
showed
"I
up."
need help, please."
Seriously. And like the other moms, they have babies who's are like 8 months, who's 3 years old, 10, 12, 18. And it's like a wide range, which is really cool. And the common theme is that every stage is easy and hard. It's just different, right? Like what's hard about this stage will make the next stage easy, but then that stage has its own challenges. So really just like being in the moment, like she's never going to be this age again and she's never going to do the things that she's doing now. So it's kind of like it's two sides of the same coin, just embracing it, right? And like I think that really defines unconditional love, right? Like all of the not I mean there are a lot of the negative things that come with this. There's all these positive aspects and just challenges that it's like wow, like I'm growing and learning as a person while I watch her grow and learn to be a little human being and like she's realizing she has hands. Like, like she's got feet and she's using them and it's like seeing life from the beginning as like this age is really fascinating, so I really like we try to be as present as we can. I mean, obviously sometimes it's really hard to do that because we're just like in the thick of it, but I think that that's good like the common theme that I'm hearing from everybody else is it's easy and hard just in different ways. Like it doesn't actually ever get easier. This stage gets easier cuz you don't have it anymore.
What would you say up until this point has been the most challenging or, like, the most surprising?
The most challenging I really think is the sleep deprivation. Is just when you go to the airport, like, there's these jokes, like, when you go to the airport, like, it could be at any time of the day, and, like, you'll get a mimosa because time's not real, right? Like,
Right, yeah.
it kind of felt like that, like, especially in the beginning, like, it doesn't even matter, like, if it's day or night because I'm doing the same thing every hour and a half to 2 hours that, like, time is a fake. It's just a construct, like, it's not real. Like, we were kind of, like, losing it. Like, this is you're not sleeping, and it's so hard to function and, like, control your emotions or your thoughts or to do anything when you don't have sleep. I think I was surprised at how not how little sleep I was gonna get, but, like, how much it was gonna impact me. Because I was like, "Oh, like, I've had all-nighters and I've, done this and blah, blah, blah," but, like, it's so different because, you know, if you're a procrastinator, you're just like, "Oh, I'll put this off till tomorrow," like, you just can't because guess what? It's gonna start over in 2 hours again. It's like Groundhog's Day a little bit in the beginning. I don't wanna scare people, but I think those first 2 months are really brutal, but then past that, it definitely gets, like, easier, right? Like, the patterns, they sleep a little bit longer, there's more gaps between when they're eating, they're showing their personality, right? Like, the beginning is just, like, a shit show, and I mean, me and Ron trauma bonded for sure, like, I think it either strengthens your relationship or it can tear it apart.
Yeah, I could totally see that.
I think that was the most surprising thing.
Especially too when you're saying, like, the first in the beginning, it being really difficult. I'm sure that it's also just hard to navigate how many products there are, what products you're supposed to do.
Oh
Then
my
there's the
god.
whole I mean, if we even started about talking about breastfeeding, that would be like a whole episode, I feel like. It's like, do you do
Yeah.
that? Do you not? Do you do both? Like, just figuring all of those things out on top of it, I'm sure is really challenging.
Yeah, I mean, so much stress and anxiety and just like analysis paralysis comes through because there are so many products in the market and like, do I even need this? Like, especially when you're going through like your baby shower guest list or not guest list,
The registry,
The gift
yeah.
registry, right? Like, words
Yeah.
still lose my mind. Like, mom brain is very real, by the way. And, like, knowing, like, what should I be doing is so tough. Like, even as a therapist, I know that, like, you shouldn't should, right? Like, even within that, you everyone is different. It's always going to look, depending on the person, the circumstances, it's only based on someone else's opinion, but if you're a new parent, like you really don't know. Like you can read all the books and you get all this unsolicited advice from people, but it's really just about paying attention to like what works for you, your family, your baby, and your circumstances, which is going to change from person and family to family.
Right.
So, like, breastfeeding, we can talk about that for a whole hour, like, we don't have enough time for that, but, like, that was really challenging too. Like, okay, I'm gonna give this a try. If my body will, produce and, this is what we've been, made from the beginning of time to do, my body has been, constructed in this way, like, I'm gonna try to do it. And, luckily she latched right away, but, the anxiety is, am I producing enough? How much is she getting? Is it enough? What should I be eating? I haven't eaten enough. I'm dehydrated. I'm not sleeping. Like, is she okay? Why is she crying? Like, it's just like so many spiraling thoughts around just feeding the baby. And then it's starting all over again in an hour.
Yeah, and I know that people put, like, a lot of pressure on themselves too to for it to for you to be able to do it, right?
Yeah, like at the hospital, they asked, like, "Are you gonna breastfeed or you gonna do formula?" And I was like, "I don't know, like, maybe but can I do both?" Like, I wanna do both, and that's what we've been doing is both, right? Like, I breastfeed, I pump, and I give formula. Depending on what's going on, the circumstances, her, like, the stage in life, like, do I have time? Like, there's all of these factors that, like, there is this message, and even as a therapist, like, it's so hard because as therapists, like, we know a lot of stuff, like, cognitively we get it, but we're still humans. We're still emotional beings that, like, are influenced by people around us, and it's like, well, I really wanna stop breastfeeding, but I feel really guilty about that. And like a lot of shame, like I should be able to do it. If I can do it, then, I should do it. And there's people who can't do it that wish they could, or the bonding, or, what is this going to do to my baby? Or, like there's all these thoughts that there's a lot of uncertainty. I think there's a lot of uncertainty, and it's hard to know which is the right thing to do. And a lot of time there is no right thing. Like I know we talked about on a different episode, like there is no right thing. There's just the best thing under the circumstances for you.
Right, and I mean, no wonder the this subtype of OCD exists, right? Talk about uncertainty. I mean, that's what
Oof.
fuels OCD, right? So,
Yeah.
of course, it's gonna be scary, right? Like, it's a lot. Yeah, so, I mean, I think we've obviously touched on a lot of challenges, and obviously, I'm sure there's so many more, but to kind of, like, tie a nice little bow on what we've been discussing. What do you feel like has been the best part of being a new mom, and what are you most excited about for your future with her?
I think the best part of this is a couple things is I really got to see how strong I am. I think a lot of the time in my life I've, been told or I've told myself like, "Oh, I'm kind of like physically weak or I'm very emotional and sensitive and I can't handle a lot of things." And, through this process, I've realized I'm a lot stronger than I give myself credit for, and that I can show up and do what I have to do when it really counts. And I think that has been a huge difference in like how I view myself, and the way of like resilience has definitely been different. And I think another great part is relationally, like me and my partner being a lot stronger, like going through this together, and like even when it's crazy, like finding the humor in it. Like, she pooped 5 times in a row, and he changed her diaper 5 times, and the 6th time, she got it on him, and, like, we just started crying laughing, like, just trying to find the humor in some of this and doing it together as a team, I think has been really great, and, like, watching him be a dad and, like, watching how sweet and cute that is, that he's holding
No.
her and talking to her, and then, like, we're buying these little books, like, he's got a whole science set of, like, astrophysics for babies, like just like silly things, and like spending time with her. I think the best part is in the morning when we wake up and she opens her eyes and sees us, she smiles, like she giggles, and like it's so sweet to see that it's like, okay, even if I didn't get sleep, like it's such a great way to wake up is like see this little beautiful smile back at you and like it's love, right? Like no one is telling her like you should do this to make mom feel better. Like
Right.
it's innocent. It's really innocent and sweet and a lot of like loving emotions. So I think that the best part of this for me has been like witnessing and being aware of like all the relational pieces of how this ties in and feeling more closer and connected to them.
Yeah. Do you feel I know I said that was gonna be my last question, but one more. Um, how do you feel like now that you're a mom that it's going to change you as a therapist as it relates to empathy and like other parents and that? Because I'm sure it has to be a totally different perspective.
Yeah. I mean, it goes from being able to like cognitively think about something rationally to just like I like in the trenches, like you can really relate, right? Like when we go through something, we have a client that goes through something similar, like it's just a different level of relatability and like the nuances, right? Like it's the nuances you don't know to think about because you weren't in it and just knowing these little pieces is like it just like takes it to the next like I know the difference between like this pump to this pump because of how it makes my boobs feel, right? Like I would never think of that or like it takes so long to leave the house. I used to be like, why are people always late with kids? Like, why don't they just leave an hour earlier? Like, you silly, silly person. Like,
You have
you
no idea.
you have, yeah. And like, I think what really, in terms of empathy, as a therapist, but also just as a person, like, man, I should apologize to my mom. Like, the amount of we always joke, like, in the Jewish culture, like, all this Jewish guilt, but, like, seriously, like, the amount of things that you go through, the sacrifices that you make in your body and in your life for this human that you love, for them to not appreciate it is like a slap in the face. And so I think I have this different understanding and empathy for just moms in general of like how hard it is and being a little bit more sensitive to when I have clients if they're complaining or talking about their parents of like, well, there's this whole other side that we may not have considered, right? Like they're just a person trying to do their best with what they have and what they learned and like they're not perfect either.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Shout out to all the moms out there.
Shout out to all the moms and the dads, all
And the
the
dads,
parents.
yes. All the present parents. Shout out to all of
Yes, all
them.
the present parents love that.
Yeah.
Well, I am so happy. I mean, again, I could have probably talked to you about this stuff forever, but I really appreciate and acknowledge your vulnerability in this because I think that as a therapist and your own an owner of your practice, it can be hard to disclose some of the struggles that you're experiencing for people to hear. But I think that it's also really powerful and that people appreciate that a lot. So I really appreciate your authenticity and willingness to open up today.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you asking and being curious and giving me this space to share.
Excellent.
So, for anyone who is interested in working with Dr. Katie, you can head over to our website, healyourrootswellness.com, to schedule a consult. If you enjoy this episode, please like, share, and comment. And thanks so much for listening.
Thanks.